Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're diving straight into the complex web of systems that surround an electronic batch record. We aren't looking at typical MES and EBR architectures as isolated islands, because they aren't. They're part of a fully integrated ecosystem. We're going to cover exactly how these systems connect, how we decide which system tells the absolute truth, and, crucially, what happens when the connections between them inevitably break.
Here is our roadmap for today. First, the wider system landscape. Second, drawing clear system boundaries. Third, mapping essential data sources. Fourth, defining system of record. And finally, interface controls and failures. Let's get right to it. Section 1. The wider system landscape. The EBR application is really the central hub of your operation. It serves as the definitive electronic record of what was actually executed on the floor, but it completely relies on surrounding systems to function. Your EBR doesn't live in a vacuum. It turns an approved master batch record into a controlled workflow. And to pull that off, it has to exchange data seamlessly with everything from high-level enterprise planning right down to the shop floor automation layer. Every single system in this ecosystem plays a highly specific vendor-neutral role. Take your ERP, for instance. It plans and accounts for materials and supplies the production order. It's not an execution system. Then there's your LIMS, which is authoritative for analytical lab results. Your EBR shouldn't be manually rekeying those results. It should receive them seamlessly along with their strict approval status. Meanwhile, your QMS handles quality events and deviations. Your automation layer, like a DCS or PLCs, directly controls the equipment, and the process historian stores all that high-resolution time series data. It's a massive team effort. To really ground this, let's introduce a fictional case study, Northstar Biologics. So, Northstar runs a cloud-hosted MES and EBR across a couple of sites, but their architecture is, well, chaotic. Staff describes system links informally, and there is no definitive map of how things connect. When you don't clearly map your systems, you end up with massive blind spots, missing values, and honestly, a whole lot of finger-pointing when things inevitably go wrong. Moving on to Section 2, drawing clear system boundaries. So what exactly is a system boundary? It's the defined edge where responsibility passes from one system to another. Everything inside that boundary is explicitly validated as that specific system's function and data. Everything crossing that edge, that's an interfaced control. If these boundaries are ambiguous, like over at our fictional friends Northstar, they create dangerous little gaps where data integrity is quietly lost. You literally have to draw these boundaries in stone before you even think about designing your interfaces.
Now, this whole concept shifts big time when you bring cloud hosting into the mix. With a traditional on-premise setup, your organization manages the full stack right within its own boundary. But once you move to the cloud or a software-as-a-service model, the provider takes over defined infrastructure layers under a contract while you manage the rest. The physical and technical borders essentially shift overnight.
But here is the massive catch, and you absolutely must remember this rule. The technical boundary might shift with a SaaS provider, but good manufacturing practice accountability and data integrity responsibilities never ever move with it. A vendor can run your servers, sure, but they cannot hold your GMP accountability. The regulated company remains strictly accountable, and those vendor validation packages, they only support your own assurance. They do not replace it.
All right, Section 3, mapping essential data sources.
When you map out your trade routes, so to speak, you'll see critical data originates in a few very specific categories. Transactional data, like your production order, comes from the ERP to authorize the batch and scope production. Environmental data flows in from monitoring systems or the historian, giving you the exact conditions with context. And lab results come directly from the LIMS. But notice something crucial about those lab results. It's not just about grabbing a raw number. The LIMS has to provide the value, the status, and the specification context, so a provisional result is never accidentally recorded as final.
Let's check back in on Northstar. They had a massive problem. They were manually rekeying release-critical lab results from their external contract testing straight into the batch record. That is a colossal risk. A simple transcription error there could literally mean releasing a failed batch. That manual process absolutely has to be replaced by a controlled digital interface that carries the result and its approved status directly into the system.
Section 4. Defining system of record.
When you are designing these interfaces, you have to resolve data conflicts deterministically, and to do that, you ask one very exact question. When looking at a piece of data, where is the definitive current value actually born or officially approved? Take a second to really think about that.
This brings us to a golden axiom you need to live by. The system of record is assigned per data item, not per system. Everything else is just a copy, a transform, a display, or a calculation. So if your ERP and your MES disagree on something like batch yield, you have to establish which system is authoritative for that specific item. If the MES calculates the yield based on shop floor data, then the MES is the definitive system of record for yield, and the ERP merely holds a reconciled copy.
Finally, Section 5, Interface Controls and Failures. An interface isn't trustworthy just because it usually seems to work. It requires specific, validated controls. First up is authentication, systems actually proving their identity to prevent rogue sources from injecting data. Then you've got queue monitoring, which watches the backlog to give you early warnings. Time synchronization ensures your timestamps make sense across different platforms. And finally, alerting, which guarantees that if something breaks, an accountable owner is notified instead of the error just getting buried in a log file that nobody ever reads.
Because let's face it, interfaces will fail. It is just a reality of IT. When an interface inevitably drops, your architecture must support a strict three-step lifecycle. Step 1. Detect the failure using those controls we just talked about. Step 2. Contain the failure so bad data doesn't spread or get acted upon. And Step 3. Recover the correct data safely from the authoritative source.
Now, over at North Star, they handled a failure in pretty much the worst way imaginable. They had a frequently failing equipment interface, and operators actually started fabricating missing values from memory just to, quote-unquote, keep moving during an outage. This completely destroyed attributability and fundamentally invalidated the entire batch.
You've got to engrave this rule into your operations. Never fabricate missing data to keep moving. Seriously, no way. Instead of making up data, you flag the gap. Then, you safely recover the data from the process historian if it's there. Or, if execution absolutely must continue during a network drop, you switch to a validated paper contingency process. You record it contemporaneously and then seamlessly reconcile it in sequence when the systems come back online.
I'm going to leave you with this question to evaluate the resilience of your own digital ecosystem. If your network went dark for 40 minutes, right in the middle of critical execution, could your architecture reconstruct the exact sequence of events without compromising a single data point? It is the ultimate test of your EBR architecture. Thanks for joining me on this explainer. Take a hard look at your own system boundaries, and I'll catch you next time.